All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today I'll be doing my preview and prediction for Kentucky versus Florida. Top 25 matchup here. Florida coming off a big win over Utah at home. They're going to be hosting the Wildcats here. 6-point favorites at the moment, 51.5 over under, 7 p.m. on ESPN. Back-to-back weeks, that's same channel and time slot for the Gators. Ben Hill Griffin Stadium in Gainesville, Florida will be the height of this one. UF leads the series 53-19 all time. They won like 30 straight. They've got ended a couple years ago. So that's a big increase for the reason why they have that many wins. And then UK won last year, though, in a defensive. Looking at the Kentucky offense, coming into the year, Will Levis, a lot of hype. A lot of people are mocking him to be number one in next year's draft. And I totally understand, he's got a lot of upside, tremendous arm strength. Man, he's got Clayton Kershaw-like velocity. I don't know if you watch baseball. This guy can really rip it. It really gets him in trouble sometimes, though. His receivers, they can't handle it when you're tearing their hands off with how hard he throws. I didn't watch last week's game, but he had 300-plus yards, 3 touchdowns. I know he threw a pick in the red zone. How consistent would he be in this contest? That's why I'm asking that question, because I heard, he made some mistakes, in last year's games. He made a lot of overthrows, made some bad decisions, especially against, complex coverages. That's something that the Gators are going to try to expose, I think, in this one. The Wildcats' deep backfield, it might not be anymore. Chris Rodriguez, I think he had a DUI in the offseason, needs to be decided in this one. No real status on him at the moment. Ramon Jefferson, a guy I absolutely loved from Sam Houston State that was originally going to Colorado, ended up here in Lexington, tore his ACL in the season opener. Hate to see that because he's a heck of a player. So Kavasier Smoke looks like he's going to have the keys to the backfield, and he's been a very reliable running back the past couple seasons, only 7 carries for 32 yards. They didn't look to get the ball going at all, running the ball. 26 attempts for 50 yards. That's horrible. Under 2 yards per average. Will Levis took a lot of sacks. That's a big reason why he only lost 18 yards doing so. So, if you get rid of that number, they still had under 80 running the ball. The offensive line struggled against Miami of Ohio. Of course, they replaced a lot of guys, but Eli Cox, is he going to be a guy that can lead them to success? He was having a big-time year last season before he got hurt. He takes over at center to Sean Manning, the Auburn transfer at guard. Other than that, it's a lot of new faces. Keontae Goodwin, high-end recruit, was a freshman, doesn't appear to be into the lineup at this point. So it's really going to be up to some of those guys like Cox and Manning. Then, Kenneth Horsey's a redshirt senior as well. I'm not really sure what to expect from this O-line because they didn't do very well last week. Miami of Ohio last year had a pretty good defensive front. They got in the backfield a lot, but coming into the year, they replaced a lot. For a group of 5 school to kind of get exposed like that, it's kind of disappointing. How much usage will Travion Robinson get? The Virginia Tech transfer. This guy is a heck of a player, and he arrives at Kentucky kind of like Wan'Dale Robinson did last season, and he did wonders. So Tavion Robinson, he's going to be a guy they're really going to lean on. 6 grabs, 136 yards last week. Dane Key, the Lexington native, a freshman, 4 grabs for 53 yards and a touchdown. Berrien Brown, he was right behind him, another freshman with 3 grabs. This is not a very deep receiving core one bit. Smoke even had a handful of receptions as well, so they're going to look to utilize him. Not a very deep receiving core for Kentucky. It's kind of a worry. Jordan Dingle at tight end, they might look to get him involved. Keaton Upshaw has shown, reliability as a catching tight end at times. Brandon Bates as well. Isaiah Cummings as well. I see he's back. They're pretty deep at tight end. I think these guys are really going to have to get more involved. There was a big concern coming into the year he would catch balls, especially when Javon Baker from Alabama ended up at UCF when he was supposed to be here. So right now, it's Robinson, a do-it-all type of pass catcher, mixed in with 2 freshman receivers. It's kind of concerning, but I'm not too worried considering who's at quarterback and who can really put it on him. But overall, this offense, it's got a much different look than it did in the offseason because this offensive line, they're very disappointing. You're young at wide receiver. Now you come into this game against Florida on the road. They're expected to put up numbers. It's going to be difficult for the Wildcats. Looking at the Florida offense, though, Anthony Richardson was very good versus Utah. How will he fare versus Brad White's defense? They performed very well against a similar quarterback in Emory Jones last year. Richardson, though, 17 to 24, only 168, completed about 71%, though. But he was very good. He seemed very comfortable, made a lot of good decisions. I don't think he forced a single ball through the air. So, obviously, the passing numbers, they're not great, 7 yards per average, but he was really good. I thought Richardson was very comfortable. A 6'4", 232-pounder. A lot of speed for that size. 106 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. I ran him in DraftKings, and I thought he'd have a big night, and, what do you know, he did. So that's going to be the theme of Richardson all year long is running the ball. 283 and 4 touchdowns total against Utah for Florida. And, obviously a big chunk of that came from the quarterback, but Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne were pretty solid. Naquan Wright, not so much. Only 39 yards on 10 attempts. Etienne, 64 on 5 carries. He really ripped off a handful of runs. Johnson, I'm just kind of shocked to see him get to that yardage total because he was really getting shut down through most of this game. And it was like that for both teams. Utah and Florida both. It was harder in yards for the running backs. Ripping off a handful of runs, though, was the Gators. They got them up to almost that 300-yard mark. So this is going to be a tough matchup, though, playing Kentucky. That's a really good Utah defense they faced last week. But they had some young linebackers, and they kind of took advantage of that. You've seen that with some of the runs they ripped off. Kentucky does not. They have a lot of veteran linebackers. We'll get to the defense in a minute. But this is a deep front seven full of veterans. It's going to be a great matchup for Florida's running game. They need more effort in playmaking from the pass catchers. Obviously, the passing attack last week wasn't great. Obviously, I think that was by design. They weren't trying too many special things, and they really didn't need the running game to step up, or the passing game rather, to step up that much. They still won this game. Pretty conservative attack. Ricky Pearsall, Arizona State transfer, 67 yards, 4 grabs. Xavier Henderson had 6 for 41. After that, though, not much. Johnson and Etienne combined for 3 grabs. Then Justin Shorter had 2 for 25 yards. Wasn't much, but that was a concern coming into the year with them too. Was the receivers and who would kind of break out, and they're not really that deep either. I think I got some good young guys as well, but the 3 names I read off, those are going to be the guys all year long they go with. How good will they be, and how consistent can they perform? The offensive line was really good, I thought, for Florida. The pass rush is a different test. Utah's defensive ends were pretty young, and I wasn't expecting them to have too great of a pass rush, but they held them to 0 sacks. Neither team had a sack in that game. It's a great front, though. Cyrus Torrance, the Louisiana Lafayette transfer, he was great. He had landed on the All-PFF team for week 1. I like Ethan White at left guard, Kingsley Uokokan at center. I was a big fan of this O-line coming into the year. I was really high on them. They only had one question mark. I think that was right tackle. That was the only really concern I had with them. It's going to be a big matchup for them, though, but I was happy with this unit coming into the season. I think they have a great opportunity to impress here. Looking at the Kentucky defense, Jordan Wright, he's back. He was also one of those guys who was suspended for week 1. Joins J.J. Weaver at outside linebacker. These guys have some lethal players coming off the edge. Weaver last year is obviously one of their best pass rushers, and he's only going to continue to grow. They also have 2 high-flying veterans in the interior as well. I mean, they run a 3-3-5, but Jaquez Jones, he's great for them. I like what DeAndre Square brings to the table. He's been here forever, it seems like. But, just like that, though, you got 4 veteran linebackers. Weaver's a little bit younger. He's showcased great abilities in coverage, making plays off the edge as well. So, this is a big-time test because obviously you want to contain Anthony Richardson. The best way to do that is, have athleticism or have veterans at linebacker who are great with play recognition. And, the more games you've played, the better it's going to be and the easier it's going to be to pick up on those things. Containing Richardson can determine the game. Strong interior D-line versus an impressive interior O-line that I just talked about is too. Justin Rogers, he's big. Josiah Hayes, I like him. Darian Henry Young, I think he's kind of moved out to outside linebacker, but he can play in the interior. Octavius Oxidine, though, he was big for them early on in the year last season. Then he got hurt. He's really a leader for them, though, in the interior. He's kind of a shot caller. He's the guy that everyone looks to as a junior. I like what they got on the interior D-line. It's going to be a big test here for both teams on the interior lines. Secondary, though, they lose numerous veterans. How disciplined will this back end be? I don't expect many deep shots from the Gators because I just don't think they have the speed on the outside really to compete. But this is a back end that struggled at times. I like Carrington Valentine, Terrell Ajine, he struggled at times at safety. Kendra Smith, he's a transfer coming over. Zion Childress might even get involved. But this downfield secondary was not great. They got absolutely scorched against Tennessee. Obviously this is not much of a test for them, so I don't expect them to. They just need to be disciplined. Don't get caught looking, and you'll be fine. Just keep everything in front of you. You don't have to be too special. And, of course, get down in the box, help stop the run if your front 6 is not performing well. Last year, held Florida to 224 yards of offense. Will they follow that same game plan is kind of the thing. And, I don't remember much from that game last year. Then there was nothing that either offense could do. I know that they were really getting a lot of great play out of their linebackers, and that was containing Emory Jones. That's something I really just talked about. So we'll see if they can follow the same thing. Previewing the Florida defense, they had 230 rushing yards to Utah. They started to get worn down in the second half, it seemed like. A lot of hard-earned yards for the Utes in that first half. But after that, they really started getting things going. And obviously, Florida won that game, but in that second half, Utah turned it over twice at the goal line, inside the 10. Thomas, he fumbled at the 1, rising through a pick from like this 5 or 6 yard line. So a little skewed there. Obviously, they came away with the win. They obviously held up when they needed to, so that's big for them. But I think we do need to keep in consideration they did give up 2 70-plus yard drives. I believe 70-plus yards. But they still gave up 2 long drives down the field. Getting Ventrell Miller back was huge, though. Sideline to sideline, rangy tackler. Brenton Cox had 10 tackles as well. He needs to find his way back in the backfield, though. He's a great pass rusher for them. Slowing down the run, that's what Cox can do for you. 10 tackles from his position. It's impressive work to see him that active. I like Trey Dean at safety. Cornerback Jason Marshall, those are two standouts in the back end. It's got a lot of potential. They did allow a 69% completion rate last week. And Utah's forte is not really to take many shots downfield. They didn't really have the personnel for it. I did say that Florida would struggle against those tight ends, and they gave up, about 130 yards to those guys. I said they would get 150, and then they got close enough. Kentucky doesn't really utilize their tight ends like that. I don't think they really have the wide receivers outside of Robinson too either. But I do think that vertical speed of Robinson is going to be interesting. This team will take shots with their play action if they can run the ball. That's not something Utah does, but Kentucky will. And they got a big arm quarterback that can really stretch it downfield. So that's going to be something to watch for the Gator defense. But I thought Gervin Dexter, he played very well in the D-line again. I thought they started off strong in that first half. In the back half of the game, they were not as impressive, and that almost costed them the football game. Looking at team comparisons, I think Kentucky has a clear edge at quarterback. It's obviously a lot to say because Levis is still kind of proving himself, but I think as a talent, he's better, even though Richardson, they're really neck and neck. But I think for this game specifically, Levis, he's got the edge there. Running backs, Kentucky used to have this edge until Jefferson went down, Rodriguez to be decided. I think the Gators, though, they have 3 guys that are going to get a lot of touches, so I'll give them the edge at running back. Pass catchers, I'm giving it to Kentucky because I think Robinson is just a great individual player. Neither team has great depth at wide receiver. They have 3 guys that are going to catch all the passes, and that's it. So, it's really kind of even, but I'll give Robinson the benefit of the doubt as a terrific playmaker. Offensive line, Kentucky's, they just struggled flat out last week. Gators get the edge there. They had their way with, a really good, front 7 for Utah. Obviously, they had a lot of youth in there, so allowed them to kind of thrive, but it's still a good unit. No slouch there. D-line, I give that to Kentucky. I think they have the edge depth. Interior, I think they're pretty stout. Linebackers, clear edge there, I think, because I just, earlier ripped off 4 names of guys that are just really good. And Jordan Wright's back, so I like the linebackers for the Wildcats. In the secondary, I'm going to take Florida just because I think Trey Dean's phenomenal, one of the hardest hitters in college football, and Jason Marshall is going to continue to grow to one of the top corners in this game. He doesn't really seem to have any tough matchups if he's going to be shadowing some freshmen in this one. So, he's obviously only a sophomore himself, but that 1 year of experience in this conference is big. My final thoughts on the prediction for this game. Keys to the contest for Kentucky, those veteran linebackers should be able to contain Richardson, so they need to prove it. I think for Florida, they got to be physical versus wide receivers. Don't allow space for Levis to throw darts. So show some muscle on the interior as well. If you can kind of push around Kentucky's interior, get the run game going, you can only eat up the clock. And last year you had such a great game against Levis, only had 80 yards in that contest. So I think it's going to be an interesting game. I think Kentucky 23-20. It seems like there's never blowouts at the Swamp. These are always close fourth quarter games, which is great. It's what we want to see. I want to go forward in this game, but I picked Kentucky in the preseason. For the first month of the year, I usually stick with my predictions unless something drastic happens. So I'm going to stick with Kentucky to win this one by a couple of points. Florida, though, I think there's a possibility they really beat up on that Kentucky O-line. I do expect them to be better. How much better will be the question. That'll ultimately dictate this game. Should be a fun one, no one gains of ultimately for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.